Imagine being dragged into a dungeon, physically tortured by your new bosses, and then going home to write a book, essentially asking them for a job.
I mean, it sounds like a nightmare, right? But that incredibly dark, deeply cynical sequence of events is exactly what birthed the most notorious leadership manual in human history.
Yeah, the most misunderstood one, too, which is exactly why we are diving into the mud today. So welcome to this deep dive.
Thank you. It's a brutal origin story, for sure, but it's really the only way to actually understand the text.
Completely. And whether you are, a curious history buff, a manager trying to survive endless company restructurings, or a startup founder navigating cutthroat competition, you are going to find something invaluable here. We are exploring the mind of Niccolò Machiavelli.
And our roadmap for this is a highly regarded translated edition of his infamous book, The Prince. Specifically, we're using the W.K. Marriott translation.
Which is great because of the extras it includes, right?
Exactly. What makes this particular source so valuable for us is that it includes this comprehensive historical introduction. It pulls from Machiavelli's personal letters, and it details the sheer brutality of the Renaissance Italian political landscape that he was navigating.
Because, honestly, you cannot separate the advice in the book from the trauma of the man who wrote it. So here is our mission for today.
Right.
We're going to decode Machiavelli's actual life to understand how his experiences forged this entirely unromantic view of human nature. And from there, we'll extract the behavioral mechanics, like the actual practical leadership advice that you can apply to your own power structures today.
It's going to be fascinating.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand the origins of his cynicism, we really have to start in 15th century Florence.
Yeah, so Machiavelli was born in 1469 into the old Florentine nobility. But the Florence he grew up in, it wasn't, a stable, peaceful republic.
Not at all.
It was a city fundamentally split by two massive opposing forces. On one hand, you had this fervent, highly austere religious movement led by the friar Girolamo Savonarola.
Right, the super strict religious side.
Exactly. And pushing against that, you had the absolute splendor, wealth, and secular power of Lorenzo de' Medici, famously known as Lorenzo the Magnificent.
It's basically a real-time sociological experiment, like piety versus power. And looking at the sources, Savonarola's approach clearly didn't win Machiavelli over.
Oh, not at all. In fact, Machiavelli uses Savonarola in The Prince as the ultimate cautionary tale. He explicitly mocks him as an unarmed prophet who came to a bad end.
Unarmed prophet. I mean, that is such a devastating phrase. Why does he view him that way?
Well, because Machiavelli observed the mechanics of belief. Savonarola built massive influence purely through charisma and religious fervor.
Just getting people hyped up.
Right. But Machiavelli noted that the multitude is inherently fickle. They will believe in you today, but when they stop believing tomorrow, you need a mechanism to force them to stay the course.
And Savonarola didn't have that.
Exactly. He had no physical leverage, no military, no institutional force. So the moment the crowd's mood shifted, his entire movement collapsed and, well, he was executed.
Wow. So he had the vision, but absolutely no leverage to protect it.
Okay.
So on the flip side, we have Lorenzo de' Medici's world, and the description of Florence under Medici rule in these sources is just wild.
That's quite a scene.
Yeah, it describes a youth culture entirely focused on idleness, gaming, and appearing incredibly well-dressed. But the most striking line for me is this. It says, "He who could wound others the most cleverly was thought the wisest."
Yeah, it paints a very specific picture of how social capital was earned back then.
Hearing you describe this obsession with posturing, the focus on aesthetics, and like a culture where the most vicious, witty takedown makes you the smartest person in the room, honestly, it sounds less like the Renaissance and more like modern social media.
It does, doesn't it?
It sounds exactly like Twitter. I mean, it's crazy.
The parallels are definitely striking, and it's crucial to realize that this wasn't just a phase for Machiavelli. This was his foundational training.
Right.
He grew up seeing that wit, the careful management of appearances, and the intellectual ability to publicly dismantle your opponents. Those were the actual currencies of success. It was an environment of constant cutthroat maneuvering.
So he's marinated in this culture of vicious optics. But optics alone don't govern states, and he's about to find that out the hard way, right?
Right, because in 1494, the Medici are abruptly expelled. Florence becomes a free republic. And suddenly, a 25-year-old Machiavelli is thrust out of this social scene and straight into the fire of public service.
Yeah, he rises to become the chancellor and secretary to the Second Chancery, also known as the Ten of Liberty and Peace.
Right, which sounds lovely, but it was essentially the War Department.
Exactly. He is thrown into the Florentine diplomatic corps, which means he is now traveling across Europe, negotiating directly with the most dangerous, unstable, and powerful leaders of the age.
He's not theorizing about leadership from a library. He's actively testing different variables of power in real time.
And the way he distills lessons from these foreign leaders is fascinating. Let's look at how he systematically builds his worldview, starting with Caterina Sforza.
Caterina Sforza, the Madonna di Forli. She was a formidable ruler, but Machiavelli watched her ultimately lose her state, and from her, he derived a mechanical truth about defense.
The thing about the fortresses, right?
Yes, leaders often build massive physical fortresses to protect themselves. But Machiavelli realized a fortress is essentially a trap if the populace hates you.
Because if the people inside the walls despise you, they'll just open the gates for your enemies the second an army shows up.
Precisely. The mechanism of a fortress relies entirely on the loyalty of the people manning it. Earning the confidence of the populace is the only true defense. Physical walls are basically useless without public goodwill.
So Caterina teaches him that you can't build physical barriers to fix a lack of trust. Then he goes to the court of King Louis XII of France. And this is presented as a masterclass in exactly what a leader should never do.
Oh, yeah. Machiavelli spent a lot of time observing the French king, and he systematically outlines 5 distinct errors Louis committed that caused him to lose all his Italian territories.
5 errors. That's a rough track record.
It is, but the most glaring error, the core mechanism of his failure, was inviting a more powerful foreign ally into Italy to help him secure minor territories.
It's the classic shark scenario. If you invite a massive shark into your pool to help you eat the little fish, eventually the shark is going to look around and eat you too.
That's exactly it. Louis wanted to expand, so he empowered an already strong entity to help him crush his minor rivals.
Right.
Once the minor rivals were gone, Louis had zero leverage against the powerhouse he had just let through the front door. Machiavelli saw that geopolitical strategy is just math. You never artificially inflate the power of a potential rival.
It's just brutal cause and effect. Which brings us to the most infamous power player of all, Cesare Borgia. Machiavelli is in Rome in 1503 during a papal election, and he watches the brilliant, ruthless Borgia make a fatal miscalculation.
Yeah, Borgia had an enemy, Julius II. During the election for a new pope, Borgia essentially allowed Julius to win
Why would he do that?
because he believed that this massive new favor, literally handing him the papacy, would buy his loyalty and secure peace. But Machiavelli watched as Julius took the power and systematically ruined Borgia.
Borgia thought a promotion would erase the past. Like, hey, we're cool now, right?
Right. And the lesson Machiavelli extracted is rooted in deep human psychology. Never believe that new favors will make powerful people forget old injuries.
Wow.
Resentment outlives gratitude. The mechanism of revenge is much stronger than the mechanism of appreciation.
That is incredibly dark, but also, hard to argue with when you look at corporate rivalries today. Finally, he observes Emperor Maximilian, and this is a completely different kind of failure.
Emperor Maximilian was a highly secretive leader. He kept his plans entirely to himself and ignored the human agencies required to carry them out. He wouldn't communicate his vision until the moment of execution.
What's fascinating here is the cascading effect of that secrecy. If you are a CEO who never tells your executive team the overarching strategy, the moment you start issuing weird, disconnected orders, they are going to push back.
Exactly. Because Maximilian's advisors didn't understand the larger plan, they immediately opposed his actions as they unfolded.
And how did he handle that?
Well, surprisingly, he was pliant in the moment. He would cave to their opposition and abandon his goals. Machiavelli recognized that leadership requires aligning your human capital. If you don't build consensus around the plan before execution, your own team will accidentally sabotage it.
So we have all these brilliant observations. He understands leverage, alliances, resentment, and communication better than anyone alive. But despite mapping all these mechanics of power, he completely fails to anticipate his own destruction.
He does. In 1512, the geopolitical winds shift dramatically. The Florentine Republic collapses, the French are driven out, and the Medici family, the rulers from his youth, storm back into power.
And they absolutely clean house.
Machiavelli is stripped of his position immediately.
Oh.
But It gets much worse. Shortly after, he is accused of being part of a conspiracy against the new Medici government.
Right.
He is thrown into a dungeon, interrogated, and literally tortured on the rack.
We need to pause on that because it's hard to process the whiplash. You are the Secretary of State. You've been negotiating with kings and emperors.
Yeah.
The next day, you are stripped naked in a basement, having your limbs dislocated by a torture device operated by the people who just took over your city.
It is a profound, life-altering trauma. He is eventually released, largely due to a general amnesty when a Medici becomes Pope Leo X, but his career is completely dead.
Right. He's basically canceled.
Oh, entirely.
Yeah.
He is exiled to a small, impoverished farm he owns in San Cassiano.
Yeah.
And this absolute rock bottom is the crucible where the prince is forged.
The sources include a letter he wrote in 1513, right, to a friend.
Yes, to Francesco Vittori, detailing his daily routine in exile. And it is a masterpiece of psychological contrast.
It's one of the most vivid images from the source material.
He describes spending his days quite literally in the mud. He's catching birds, haggling over pennies with woodcutters, playing cards with the local butcher. He says he is covered in dust and squalor, constantly feeling the malice of his fate.
But then the sun goes down.
Then evening comes. He returns to his house, strips off his muddy peasant clothes, and puts on his noble court dress. He walks into his study, and he writes that he is lovingly received by the ancient thinkers.
That transition is incredible.
It really is. He says that for 4 hours, he feels no weariness, forgets every trouble, and doesn't even fear death. He takes all the trauma, all the diplomatic observations, and he synthesizes them into this little book.
So what does this all mean? I'm struggling to square this timeline, though. He's writing this brilliant, sweeping philosophy of power, but he dedicates the book to Lorenzo de' Medici, the grandson of the magnificent Lorenzo.
Yeah.
In the dedication, he explicitly points out his unmerited sufferings and his desperate poverty. So is this book actually a brilliant work of political science, or is it just the most highly produced, desperate resume in history? Was he just begging his torturers for a job?
It's the ultimate question, and synthesizing those two realities is where we find Machiavelli's true genius. It's absolutely a resume, but it's a resume written by a man who has had every romantic illusion about justice beaten out of him.
Right.
The trauma of exile and torture stripped away the idea that the world is fair or that good things happen to good people. Yes, he wanted employment, but the product of that desire was a manual based purely on the harsh, mechanical realities of power that he had barely survived.
Which brings us to why this book still shocks people today. Because we still pretend that the world operates on fairness. We expect modern leaders, whether in government or corporate boardrooms, to project total moral purity.
And that expectation was Machiavelli's core frustration. He writes that men look at things as they wish them to be, not as they actually are.
Wishful thinking.
Right. He argues that if a leader tries to be perfectly good in a world full of people who are not good, they will inevitably be destroyed.
Wait, but if you abandon being good, doesn't that just create a toxic environment? Take the most famous debate in the book. Is it better to be loved or feared?
Right, the classic question.
If you rule a company by fear, doesn't that just guarantee high turnover and employees actively plotting to replace you?
It's a vital pushback, and Machiavelli addresses it with a very specific mechanical caveat. He says that ideally, a leader should be both loved and feared. But since you usually have to choose, it is much safer to be feared because of control. Men love at their own free will. If the market dips or bonuses are cut, that love vanishes instantly. But men fear at the will of the prince.
You control the fear.
Exactly. You rely on what is in your control, not the fickle emotions of others.
Yeah.
However, and this addresses your point about toxic cultures, he explicitly states that a leader must absolutely avoid being hated.
Oh, so there is a line.
A very clear line. Fear is a calculating respect for consequences. Hatred is a destabilizing, irrational force. If you are hated, people will absorb massive personal losses just to see you destroyed.
So fear is a boundary, but hatred is a liability. That distinction is completely lost when people use the term Machiavellian.
It really is.
But he goes even further into this idea of perception with the optics of virtue.
This is perhaps his most controversial premise.
Right.
Machiavelli explicitly argues that a leader does not actually need to have traditional good qualities like mercy, faith, integrity, humanity.
Right.
In fact, strictly adhering to them is dangerous because it limits your options in a crisis. But it is absolutely essential to appear to have them.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is PR. He is dissecting public relations and brand management centuries before the concept existed. He writes, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few really know what you are."
It's profound because he recognized that the masses judge by the eye, not by the hand. They see the projection. They don't get close enough to touch the reality.
If you look at modern leadership through that lens, it changes everything. When a massive corporation makes a highly publicized charitable donation, is that genuine humanity, or is it the necessary appearance of virtue required to maintain market dominance?
That's the exact question.
Machiavelli would say the internal motive is entirely irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the mechanical result of the perception.
This raises an important question, though. It forces you to question if our standards of power have actually evolved to be more moral, or if today's leaders are simply better at utilizing the exact appearances of virtue Machiavelli codified in 1513.
It's a bit unsettling to think about. Having completely deconstructed the illusions of power, what specific tools does he give us? Let's translate some of these Renaissance tactics into actionable advice for anyone navigating a modern corporate or political structure.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's start with handling flatterers, because every leader deals with yes men.
Right. Flattery is a chronic disease of power. If you listen to everyone, you look weak and easily swayed. If you listen to no one, you're flying blind. Machiavelli prescribes a system of highly regulated truth-telling.
How does that work?
He says you must choose only a few wise advisors. Give only those few the freedom to tell you the unvarnished truth. As he showed with the example of Fra Luca, taking too much unsolicited advice ruins a leader's plans.
But there's a catch, right?
A major one. They are only allowed to tell you the truth when you explicitly ask for it, and on no other subjects. If everyone in your organization feels they have the right to constantly critique your plans unsolicited, you lose the majesty and authority of your position.
So you need a tight, entirely controlled feedback loop.
Exactly. Controlled truth.
Next up, his absolute disdain for mercenaries. He argued that a state is never secure without its own forces. But, we don't use mercenary armies today. How does this apply?
Think of mercenaries in terms of incentives. Machiavelli observed that a mercenary captain is essentially a contractor. They aspire to their own greatness, not yours.
Oh, wow. It's the exact same mechanism as hiring a completely outsourced, uninvested consultant or development team for your company.
Yes.
If the code breaks, they get paid more hourly fees to fix it. They are financially incentivized for your project to constantly be in a state of manageable crisis.
Precisely. You cannot secure your department, your project, or your company without forces that are genuinely invested in your long-term success. If their fate isn't tied to your fate, they will eventually ruin you.
What about his concept of studying war in peacetime? He talks about learning the geography, mountains, valleys, rivers. How do we apply that?
Well, if you are managing a team today, that geography isn't literal. It means utilizing the quiet, profitable seasons in your career to intensely study your industry's landscape.
Doing the homework when things are calm?
Right. When there is no immediate crisis, you map out the competitive mountains and the economic valleys. So when the market suddenly shifts, you already know the terrain. You aren't caught off guard.
And anticipating those shifts connects perfectly to his final and maybe most difficult piece of advice adapting to fortune.
Yes. Machiavelli concedes that fortune, luck, circumstance, market forces controls about half of our actions. We control the other half. But the mechanism of long-term success isn't just about strategy. It's about overcoming your own hardwired nature.
What do you mean by that?
He says you must align your methods with the spirit of the times. If you built a massively successful company by being a cautious, methodical leader, those traits are your nature. But if the industry suddenly demands aggressive, rapid innovation, your caution will destroy you.
The very traits that made you successful yesterday are the exact things that will bankrupt you tomorrow.
Exactly. Almost all leaders eventually fail because when the times change, they cannot change their intrinsic nature to match the new reality.
So look at the journey we've taken today. We started in the vicious, performative society of Medici Florence, where words were used as weapons.
Yeah, the real-life Twitter.
We followed Machiavelli through the brutal realities of Renaissance diplomacy, down into the literal physical trauma of a torture chamber, and finally into the quiet study of an exiled man.
Quite an arc.
He didn't write a flowchart about how he wished the world worked. He stripped away the polite fictions of leadership to show us the raw machinery underneath.
And as you think about how that machinery operates in your own life, I want to leave you with one final fascinating mechanism from the text. Machiavelli points out a dynamic about how someone actually rises to power.
Okay.
He notes that a leader who is elevated by the nobles, the elites, the board of directors, senior management, has a much harder time maintaining that power than a leader elevated by the people, meaning the general workforce.
Wait, really? Why is the elite support more dangerous?
Because those nobles consider themselves to be your equals. They put you there, which means they believe they can remove you. They are inherently harder to satisfy, harder to control, and quick to turn on you the moment you don't serve their specific interests.
And the people.
The people, however, just want to be protected and led well.
So turn that inward to your own career trajectory. As you navigate your own rise to success, you need to identify who are your nobles and who are your people. Are you mistakenly relying on the peers and elites who secretly view themselves as your absolute equal? Or are you building an unbreakable foundation with the team that actually does the work, the people who lift you up and don't view you as disposable?
It's a crucial distinction.
It is something to seriously think about the next time you look at that clean, polite organizational flowchart and wonder what forces are actually moving the pieces. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.